I'm going to begin with a disclaimer. I'm staying away from politics, at least in this talk, of how cities isolate women. Because we live in times where politics has tainted everything across the globe. I find one can't have a conversation about any public issue these days without the prism of politics. Here in India, at least, every issue is seen as are you pro Modi or anti Modi? And so the space for neutral people who see ourselves as rational, issue based debaters, and I love a good political debate, but that space to be objective or neutral no longer exists. And so, while there is certainly a way in which this topic of women in isolation can be viewed through politics, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to speak from my own perspective, both as a woman, clearly, but also someone who has been working on the issues of cities and that I've been deeply passionate about for over 20 years now in India, and how cities can amplify the isolation that women feel. Women, whether by nature or by societal history, we prioritize nurturing our families, all the aspects of physical, emotional caregiving. And the Indian cities force this as a choice for women. And it shouldn't have to be so. It shouldn't be an either or situation because it's a false choice. And for millions of women or single moms, it's not even optional. They need to work and they need to take care of their children. I think that women relate to the issues of gender from a deeply personal place as well. We want full and total emancipation. We want a fair and equal world of opportunity for all women. And we want to be socially valued and personally fulfilled. But, emancipation and fighting against stereotyping should not demand that we play by the regular rules because all of these are actually set by men. We should not be seen as the weaker sex. Oh, we are the woker sex. We are not the fairer sex. We are the sex that is fair. And neither should the journey demand a price of rejecting the best qualities we possess. So I don't want to dismiss all the wonderful aspects about being a woman in order to claim my equality. Why can't we embrace what we bring as women? So the biological act of giving birth was an awesome act of creation. And I jest with the men in my life that the reason their gender needs to conquer is because they can never create. And so they're constantly restless in search of something to fill that void. And I also, frankly, found joy in nurturing my children as they grew. But this doesn't mean that it's a universal sentiment for all women or a priority for all women. And we can be comfortable with our differing priorities without any divisive politics coming into it. But let me come to the role that cities play. The experience that I had when we returned to India was an early insight into the results of poorly planned cities. The unthinking manner in which our cities are built are a consequence of how our planners and our policymakers have drawn out the blueprints for our cities. And this has resulted in the sense of isolation that women face. Planning with women in mind is a blind spot, and this continues across literally all aspects of public decision making. And this is because those who are in the positions of decision making, which are always the planners, the engineers, the city managers, they're all primarily men who haven't given any thought about the needs that women have and how the character of the city that they are planning can either support us or subjugate us. One of the institutions we founded is a financial inclusion institute, lending to women. And their stories are stark reminders that is invariably also the women who are in the bottom of the pyramid that get isolated the most, from access to decent homes, from paying jobs, healthcare, even support groups and networks. Now, look at the consequence of the lack of thinking in the planning process. Just a simple thing like saying, what if we could provide for good quality childcare facilities for young mothers, which is close enough to home so that you could take care of the operational aspects. Time to complete domestic chores, drop off your child to the center, and then get onto a bus or a metro stop, travel comfortably to your place of work, return in the evening, pick your child up, and bring it home. And all this is not logistically impossible or exhausting. These details not only matter, they are all that matter. And this requires a planning religion that ensures social amenities at the hyper-local level. groceries, a variety of household goods and services. And what's true for preschools and nurseries is also true for health clinics, because women generally tend to be the primary caregivers, even for elderly parents. And it's absolutely true of our transport infrastructure. Public transport, which enables connectivity across the city, is totally unfriendly to women. Most Indian cities don't have adequate public transport, networks that are from start to finish. Here again, we need to understand this dysfunctionality from the woman's perspective in a very granular term. In very granular terms, it's generally called, by the service providers, it's called like the last mile problem, like getting power or telecom into the individual home. But I want to call transport the first step problem. A woman being able to take the first step out of her home into a larger world of opportunities. And how does she get to the bus stop or the metro station? How far away is it? And when she returns home in the evening, are the streets and crossings safe? Are there footpaths? Are these even walkable? Those 500 odd yards, that's the stuff that matters. Like the streetlights. I see this from my own rather terrifying experiences. I would shy away from a very young age after those early years of traumatic experiences from going alone through dark, isolated places. So, before all the big picture stuff, the first step actually requires making cities safe for women. But I want to say that you add up these frictional elements and all the subliminal constraints, each of which individually may seem insubstantial, but collectively they pile up to this insurmountable wall that a woman has to scale. And the net result is that any woman who prioritizes the role of being a nurturer or a sustainer, well, she has to make compromises with what else she can do with her life. And this is the tragic isolation in Indian cities that women face. So, the good news is that the solutions are pretty straightforward. We need the blueprints of our cities to reflect the priorities of women, from urban plans to urban projects. And this stuff is not rocket science. Where will the leadership for such a shift come from, though? Ideally, it needs to be gender neutral and ought to come from both men and women. After all, when women are in leadership positions, well, we aren't taking decisions that suit only women. So it should be the same when men are in leadership positions. It's also about power. The more women have positions of power and decision making, the better it is, because the amazing thing about democracy is that the velocity of change is extraordinary. Lighthouse examples are transmitted with great speed. Hey, it's being done successfully in Kochi, so let's do this in Kolkata. Those kinds of magical things happen where suddenly a good idea suddenly spreads. But even within this broad term of leadership, there's the question about what kinds of leadership. Is the cause of women dependent on a small minority of women fighting for political authority, business influence, or societal influence? And there's no question that role models are crucial. Those who stand for gender rights and fight the hard battles and win them, because they inspire so many more women, a Gloria Steinem or even a Viji Penkutu. But I think in leveling the playing field for women, there's also a need for what I call quiet champions. And I can speak for myself. I've never been a firebrand women's activist, but every morning that I get up and every night I go to sleep, the flame of women's issues never dies in my heart.